Hi everyone, Leani Lopez here with another episode of I Got Nothing, a podcast for exhausted writers. I am joined by a fellow exhausted writer. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Scott Roche. I am definitely an exhausted writer. I write in a variety of genres, science fiction, fantasy, horror, and I've been writing for about 17 years.
Awesome. And you also have a book that you released as well. The Casebook of, what's it, Esho? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Casebook of Esho St. Clair.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It is a Gaslamp fantasy, the first book in a series. It's basically about my consulting detective who lives in Manhattan in the late 1800s. And he takes on all kinds of cases, most of them involving the supernatural. And the first book, the Casebook of Esho St. Clair, has two stories in it. One that's sort of Lovecraftian, and the other one is what I call Tesla punk.
I love it. I love a good, mystery, but that has, supernatural elements to it. Just that description, I'm like, yeah, it's on my wish list. I'm going to get to it. And I know you've been writing for a long time. Was this something that you knew as a kid you were going to be a writer? Or was it sort of a hobby that developed into something more?
It was kind of a hobby that developed into something more. I remember writing stories in high school. Most of my creativity tended to be, the outlet tended to be tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. Nice. And I started writing stories probably in my late 20s, early 30s. Still kind of as a hobby. It didn't really get serious until I would say around 2007, 2008, when I started listening to a lot of podcast novels. That was kind of a new thing. Podcasting was kind of a new thing.
Yeah.
And I started listening to a lot of podcast novels, and I was like, you know what? This sounds like a lot of fun. So I wrote my first novel and podcast it, and I was hooked.
That's awesome. There is something about audio. I've been doing podcasts for a while, and I released 2 audio dramas. And I don't know, there's just something about a story in audio form that is just so hypnotizing. I love being able to just sit and listen and visualize it myself and just listen to the story being told.
Absolutely. I've always loved audiobooks. In general, I've always loved podcasts, and kind of marrying the two. I still podcast my fiction, although most of it's short form fiction. And it's just a lot of fun to produce. It's a lot of fun to listen to. Yeah,
absolutely. And so you had this idea. You're like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna write a novel. And how did it feel when you did it? When you finished the novel?
It felt amazing. So I wrote my first novel for NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt so good when it was done. And it was the first time I had ever written anything successfully novel length. Up to that point, it had mostly been short stories. And it just felt like a serious accomplishment, It was a short novel, about 55 or 60,000 words, but still, yeah, it felt good.
Yeah, that's still a lot of words. I don't think people realize how many words that actually is until you're in it. Yes. Until you're doing Nano, and you're like, oh, wow, yeah, no, that's so many.
Yes. Yeah, especially if you're writing every day. For those people who don't know, the idea is to write a novel, which they loosely define as 50,000 words in, November has 30 days or 31 days. Roughly averages out to 1,700 words a day. And that's usually about, I'd say, 3 or 4 manuscript pages on average.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot, especially in a month that has a holiday in it, at least in America, so.
Yeah, I did Nano in 2016 because I really wanted to start my pirate novel, which is the one I'm working on. It got put away many times, but I think I wrote the first 50K in that month and then didn't touch it for a year and a half because it was just I did it. it burnt me out so much, and I can't even look at it right now. I need to come back to this another time.
Yes, for sure.
But I've heard like so many people have sort of jump started their novels that way, and I think it's such an interesting challenge, and it's such a great thing to do, because not just Nano, but challenges like that, because you are doing it with other people. And writing is so solitary that when you're all like doing a challenge together, it feels a little bit easier, or at least a little bit more. There's another element to it, so you're like, oh, it's not just me. Like, I can talk to somebody else and be like, oh my god, I can't meet my word count today, and they're like, yeah, no, I can't either. There's this camaraderie that you don't usually get when you're writing a novel.
Oh, the community aspect was one of the best parts. I had a lot, and especially back then, I had a lot of friends who were writers, kind of scattered all around, and it was just something we all sort of did together and encouraged one another. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I don't do it anymore, and so I miss some of the aspect of it. But yeah, it's a great way to get started. It's a great way to kind of get your feet wet, and then after that, to feel like you've got more time to write that first draft, and
Yeah.
you don't have to do it in that really compressed period. My favorite NaNoWriMo story is, I did it a few times, and I got to the one year I got to the last day of November, and I was 10,000 words away.
Oh.
And my wife was like, "So what do you need to finish?" And I was like, "Well, realistically, it's going to take me all day. I've never written that many words in one stretch, so I just need to not be bothered."
I need to be left alone.
Yeah, and that was a big ask, because at that point we had little kids, and that meant that all parenting duties were going to be on her for the day. So she was willing to do it, and she gave me the time, and I wrote 10,000 words in one day, and I was absolutely dead at the end of it.
I was gonna say, and you were totally done by the end of it.
Yeah, I was definitely drooling for sure.
God, yeah. I mean, writing in general takes a lot of energy. And then when you have big writing sessions like that, you're like, please don't speak to me for the next 3 business days. Like, you're just like a puddle on the floor. You're like, I did it. Yay.
Exactly. I do not recommend anybody try that.
But it does put novel writing in perspective when you don't have that time frame. When you jump in head first in a challenge like that, and you're like, okay, I gotta write this novel in a month, and then like you write your next novel not in that time, you're like, oh, okay, I can slow down. I don't need to rush until my fingers bleed. Like, it gives you an
Yes,
appreciation for not having a deadline.
100%.
So aside from Nano, and now that you're working on your novels on your own, what kind of writing rituals do you have, if any?
I don't really have any rituals, which was kind of on purpose. Like, I tried not to tie writing to anything in particular. I am able to write pretty much under any circumstances. Like, I don't have to have special music. I don't have to have like freedom from distraction. And I think writing as when I was all my kids are grown now, but writing as a parent with a full-time job and some special needs kids, like you find writing time where you can, and that was good training. I still am forced by a variety of circumstances to just find the time to write when I can, and so I can't be too precious about, oh well, it's got to be the wind's got to be blowing from the southeast, and I've got to have the Eagles on the radio, and whatever else. No, it's just I write when I can, as much as I can, as often as I can.
Yeah, and understand, as a mom of a special needs kid, I totally get that. It's only been the last 2 years that I've been able to write during the day, or, kind of whenever I want to. Prior to that, I was home with him, homeschooling him. And now he goes to a school that meets all of his needs. But like this week, he's on spring break. So it's kind of reverted back to whenever I can fit in a moment to write. And then most days it's been like, not today. It's just not going to
Exactly.
happen.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think as writers, as much as rituals do help, I do think we need to have some flexibility like that because there's just so much going on, and like I said before, it takes so much energy that some days those rituals are not going to work, and that's totally fine. That probably means you need to rest that day.
Yeah, and I mean, as somebody with chronic health issues on top of everything else, I have just had to develop a sense of grace for myself. It's like, well, I just don't have the energy to write today. I don't have the time to write today, and that's okay. I'll write tomorrow. And then it's the same with editing. Like I'm in the middle of editing a novel right now, and I got on a pretty good roll there for a couple of days where I was doing, at least a chapter a day. The last couple of days have been really, really full. Let's just say it that way. And I didn't have time to, and I didn't beat myself up about it. I was just like, it'll still be there when I get the time, and I'll make it happen. So I think that's important too, is just letting yourself have a day off if you need a day off.
Yeah, that has been, I think, my main struggle. Even though, writing is now my full time job. But again, it hasn't been until the last couple of years that I've been able to write full time. And having a moment or having time where I'm just not in the mindset to write is frustrating because it's my job and I love it and I want to do it. But like you were saying, giving yourself the grace to just be like, I need to rest today I'm still working on that. That is such a big thing. And I always kind of remind myself that I do better when I allow myself to rest. Like pushing through and forcing the work doesn't get it done faster. If anything, it just delays it because then I take twice as long to recover.
Yes. Yeah, that's how it is with me. And beating yourself up about it is not productive either, when
No.
you don't want to do it. And that's why, like, there's common advice that says to write every day, and that's a nice goal. Not everybody can do that, and that's okay. It would be great to write 500 words a day, because if you write 500 words a day, then basically in 3 months to 4 months you've got a novel. But yeah, I mean, it's just not realistic for everybody. Probably not for most people.
Yeah, and that's something I've been hearing a lot doing these interviews because it's one of the main pieces of advice that you hear all the time is like write every day. But pretty much over half of the people I've interviewed have just been like, that's just not feasible. It's not always feasible to write every day.
And that's one of the downsides of something like a NaNoWriMo, where you
Yeah.
basically, if you want to make that goal, you have to write pretty much every day, or you get behind really quickly. And burnout is a very real part of that.
Yes.
So I like to avoid burnout.
Yeah, I am working to avoid burnout. It's my biggest weakness. I ended up doing this huge project the last 2 years, and it premiered last year. And between doing all the marketing for that, and then ended up doing like another season of this show, and like just my other work, I ended up having to take the full month of October off because I was
Hmm.
just so burnt out. And because I delayed the burnout, that actually turned into essentially the rest of the year off because
Yeah.
I got sick multiple times. And everybody's like, yeah, because you burnt yourself out so bad. And I was like, so I don't want a repeat of that. So it really is, it's so hard, especially when you love something like writing and it brings you so much joy. You want to keep doing it. And sometimes you'll burn yourself out to do that, and that's not good either. So you just finding that balance is so hard.
It is. It is. Especially when you're a writer who also has a full time job or a
Yep.
family, or all of the above.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Not enough hours in the day.
no. And that's kind of why I like to write short stories, because in the time that I do have, it feels like it's less pressure to write short stories, and I've always loved short stories. So, for me, it's my favorite thing to do for a variety of reasons. Sometimes I can get a short story written in one writing session, at least the first draft, and I feel like a sense of accomplishment. Whereas writing a novel is, by its very nature, just takes longer, and it's easy for me to get sidetracked because of life circumstances or another idea comes to mind or whatever. And so for me, writing short fiction, whether it's a short story or a novella, is kind of my sweet spot.
Yeah, I've written a couple of short stories over the years. It's not usually my medium. My ideas like to go on and on and on. But I've definitely developed an appreciation for them and want to do it more to break up these giant projects that I have. Because I would love to just have like a little self-contained story that I could just like write and like chill and focus on, and then have that feeling of accomplishment, like I wrote a story, yay.
Exactly.
To kind of break up all the major things. Once a new idea takes hold and you're like, okay, I think this is a story, how do you develop it? Do you kind of sit with it? Do you immediately jump into brainstorming? Like, what is your process to developing a story?
A lot of it depends on if I have the idea for a short story or a novel. If it's a short story, then, it's something that I'll kind of jump into. I don't necessarily have to have it fully fleshed out in my head, although it's good to have like an end in mind. If it's a novel, I use what's called the snowflake method or model, which is something I found online years ago. It's a very organic way to build an outline,
Mm-hmm.
and so a lot of it basically boils down to starting with the idea, creating one sentence that kind of encapsulates your idea, and then gradually building that up into an outline. And it's it's a great way to do a longer project for me anyway. So yeah, that's kind of my process. With short stories, I'm very much a pantser, but with novels, I'm more of a reluctant plotter.
I love that. Yeah, reluctant plotter is such a good description because I also used to be a pantser and then developed into a plotter just by ghostwriting and the work I was doing. And so, like, now I kind of have to outline things, even though most of the time I just want to jump into the story. So I love that. Reluctant plotting is such a great term.
Yeah.
And since this is a writing advice podcast, I like to ask my guest, what is the best or worst piece of writing advice you've ever received?
The best advice that I've gotten is finish your stuff. One of the things I struggle with is finishing things. And so, focusing on something to its conclusion that's probably the best advice I've ever gotten. The worst kind of gets back to that whole writing every day thing.
Yeah.
Um, it's good advice for some people. It's just not good advice for me. So I think that's probably the worst piece of advice I've ever heard.
Yeah. And the finishing thing. Oh man, that just struck me because it took me so long to actually finish stories. I would start so many things and then just not actually finish them. I think
Right.
that's why my current book, which is the book that I had started during Nano, I think that's why it's so important to me because it was started during that phase of me not finishing things. But I actually finished the first full draft last year. So I was like, I broke the curse. I did it. I finished it. And I finished stuff since then. But yeah, you get the beginning, the middle's kind of hard, and then it's like, there's no end. Like, it's so hard to finish things, especially in this day and age with literally, like, you've got work and you've got family and there's all this media and all these distractions. So finishing anything in general is a huge accomplishment.
Yes. Yeah. I definitely encourage people to take those kind of wins, whether it's finishing your first draft or even just finishing a chapter. It just feels good.
It really does. Back in December when I finally finished drafting the last couple chapters, I mean, they were a mess. There was brackets that I had to fill in, but it was still done. And I took the win. And it feels amazing when you finally finish a story or finish a project, especially one that you were so passionate about.
Yes. And that's, and that's kind of another, piece of advice that I tell people: the passion, remember why you're doing it. Remember why you're writing, whatever your motivation is, kind of try and keep that in front of you. For me, it's about telling the kind of stories that I want to tell. Whether I make a lot of money at it or not, whether I, get a lot of feedback on it or not. I didn't start writing stories to become famous. I didn't start writing stories to make any money. I did it because I enjoyed it, and anytime I kind of lose sight of that and start to focus on things like the money or the sales or the things that are kind of secondary, for me at least, I can get really upset.
Yeah.
And I just have to go back to those roots of why I started writing in the first place.
Yeah, that resonates so much. The project I finished, which was an audio drama, and it's all the episodes of the first season have been released, and that was my big thing last year. But prior to that, I had to write it, then produce it, then edit it, and the editing was so difficult just because it was so time consuming. Like, I would be editing for like 3 hours, and I covered an hour of audio maybe. Sometimes it was 45 minutes, and anytime my brain would kind of be like, well, hurry up so you can release it, or you know what I mean? Like, you haven't released anything because you're working on this. I had to kind of put the brakes on and be like, no, don't rush it, because so what? You rush it and you get it out and it doesn't sound like you want it to sound. It's not the story you wanted to tell because you didn't take the time to do it properly. So I really had to remind myself, like, no, focus on the story. And even like cutting things, like we recorded stuff that ended up being cut, and I ended up having to rewrite as I was editing just because the flow of the conversation. So like cutting scenes or lines that I really enjoyed was like so painful.
Yes.
But I had to do it to make sure it was the best story, and it was the story I wanted to tell.
Exactly. Editing. That is the worst part about writing. Because I want to keep everything. And I write pretty tight. I'm usually adding something in my second draft rather than taking away. But there's always something to be taken away. There's always something that you need to cut because it just doesn't flow well, or there's no point to it, or whatever it may be. And it's hard to cut those things out because you're like, well, that's, an hour, 5 hours, 10 hours worth of work that I did that are now nobody's going to see.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you've got to do what's best for the story.
Yeah, I had to make that decision recently. During my edits for this book, I had a scene that I really enjoyed. It showed my main character with someone who she had known before but wasn't part of the adventure. And the dynamic was great, but I realized it didn't belong in this book. Like, it didn't add to the story, and the story's already pretty massive as it is. So I was like, I need to take this out. And I took it out, and that it was 7 pages removed from a 11-page chapter. And so I was like, great. Now I got this hole to fill. Awesome. Fantastic. But in the end, as much as it hurt to remove and also hurt to fix it, it's better than it was. It's more concise. It doesn't take away from the action. And now I saved it so I can put it somewhere else. I can put it in a different book where it probably belongs. But it was painful. It was so painful, especially when it was 7 pages. It's like,
I can imagine.
That's so many pages. And finally, just to kind of wrap things up, what advice would you give to new indie authors starting out? We touched on it a little bit, but what specifically would you tell new indie authors?
Read. It's funny that I even need to give that advice, because you would think of anybody who would enjoy reading, it would be writers. But there are so many writers that are like, I just don't read very much, or I don't read outside of my genre. You should read.
Yes,
You should read
read.
often, and you should read outside your genre, because you never know when you're going to learn something or pick up something from a story that you wouldn't have otherwise read, because it doesn't happen to be in the genre that you typically write in. And for me, as a multi-genre author, that's more obvious, I guess. But for somebody who only writes in one genre, romance or science fiction or whatever it may be, they may not be as clued into how advantageous it can be to read broadly. You can really, like, I've learned some great writing techniques from romance novels that I've read. Because one of the things that you have to learn as a writer, or you should learn as a writer, is how to develop an emotional resonance with your readers. And romance is a genre that does that very well. It's a very specific emotion, but that's none the less complicated or nuanced, or doesn't require less technique just because it's one specific emotional piece. So yeah, learning to write your characters better, or make them more realistic, or whatever it may be, it requires, in my mind, reading broadly and reading frequently.
I am so happy you said that because I say that all the time. Like I'm an author coach, and that's one of the suggestions I give, not just to read, but to read other genres, or even consume media in other genres, like watch other genres in movies, because you
Yeah.
never know what part of that genre is going to resonate with you and help elevate the genre you're currently writing. Or like
Yes.
it may pivot your story in a direction you weren't anticipating, but makes a better story because you kind of opened yourself up to something else.
Exactly. My wife and I, we have a tradition around the Christmas time every year to watch some of the sappiest possible Christmas romance movies we can find. And there have been things that have come out of those watching sessions as a writer that have helped me a great deal, even though I don't really write romance or Christmas stories.
Yeah.
Still, finding ways to develop your character, finding ways to develop relationships, because your stories are going to have relationships in them, even if they're not necessarily, front and center, is important. And that is a way to do that. I think it's a good way.
Yeah. I mean, for ghostwriting, I write for one genre, which is romantic comedies. And that's not my forte. Well, it is in ghostwriting, but for my personal projects, that's not where I lean. But because I've written so many, that I feel like it's enhanced me writing romantic relationships in other genres or across all my stories, because it's about the emotion between the two people, and it's about staying in the moment between those two people. And I've noticed with this book that I'm working on, which is sort of my first book post ghostwriting career, that the romantic relationships, or any of the relationships in the story, just feel a little bit more solid than they used to when I was writing them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's an amazing piece of advice. Just consume other genres, because it's just there's so many wonderful stories out there, and you never know what you're going to pick up from the next thing you read.
And you never know where that inspiration for your next story is going to come from. And it could very well come from something that you might not have otherwise read or watched.
Exactly. Well, Scott, this has been wonderful. Thank you for chatting with me. Where can people find you online?
You can find links to everything at scottroche.com. That's SCOTTROCHE.com. Links to all my social media and my YouTube and all that good stuff.
And I will put the link to that in the description of this episode so people can find you.
Fantastic.
This is a reminder that I do have a Patreon. Patrons receive episodes up to 2 days earlier than the general public. There are exclusive blogs and podcast episodes that are only found on Patreon. You'll also receive discounts on writing services, behind-the-scenes tidbits for Battle Cry, including access to our blooper reel, access to my Discord server, and shout-outs in future podcast episodes. So head over to patreon.com/Leani M. Lopez or check out the link in the description. All right, thank you again, Scott. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and happy writing!